Welcome, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today at the first Nordic-Baltic Private Equity and Venture Capital Momentum event. I am Margus Uudam. I'm chairman of Estonian Private Equity and Venture Capital Association and founding partner of Karma Ventures. I think we are here today to witness something quite special.
That is very true. As for the first time in years, we have the Nordic and Baltic private equity venture capital key players gathering to discuss what could be the next steps in the very successful regional ecosystems to develop even further. I am Kadri Lindpere, the Managing Director of Estonian Private Equity and Venture Capital Association, and I am very honored to stand here today as a representative of all the co-organizers of this event, 7 Nordic and Baltic VCAs.
Now, let's get to the essence of why actually we are here. And it might be not the usual LP-GP conference discussing what LPs look for, what GPs need to raise funds. Nordic and Baltic region, we have enjoyed a lot of success over many years. We have built great companies. We have done great investments. And we have developed our markets systematically. Nordic started so much earlier, and doing systematic work on the ecosystem have made Nordic region one of the most outstanding regions in the world. Baltic private equity and venture capital market started a bit later. And Baltic markets have been heavily supported and helped by many institutional investors. EBRD being the first one really taking our ecosystem to next place. And EBRD is also one of the great supporters of today's event. As well, EIF joined us and helped to build cooperation between all 3 Baltic governments, making Baltic Innovation Fund happen and developing significantly the ecosystem further. Now, we are here to discuss and brainstorm if things we have done so far are good enough. We are actually exploring, is it okay to continue as we have done so far? Country by country, mostly developing individual ecosystems, or there is actually potential to do something more together. There might be different thoughts about it, different motivations behind it. For some, it might be to compete with US. For some, it might be to compete with best European ecosystems. For some, maybe it's about competing with neighbors. And for some, even in so many rankings and in so many developments, we have been #1, it might be never enough. The motivations behind it can be really different. So we are really trying to explore. We'd like to see your participation, to understand if together Nordic and Baltic countries can find more synergies and potentially build the best ecosystem in the world and contribute to the so many angles of innovation, and why not also to save the planet. We ask all of you to think along. This event is for people who have mission in mind. And so we really would like to see you thinking along and contributing your ideas on the topic.
Absolutely. So please share your thoughts and post questions on Slido. It's www.sly.do. The code of the event is Momentum21. And a few practicalities I'd like to address. We have 2 breaks planned, one at 3:15 before the first panel discussion, and the second one at 4:20 in between the panels. The event will naturally be recorded, and we will share those with all of the registered attendees after the event, so do not worry in case you cannot be with us all the time. From time to time, we also look at some numbers. Some are really basic, some inspiring, but they are all here to help us calibrate the thoughts on the topic.
And some numbers might be even a bit funny. Firstly, let's look at something really basic, our population. So Nordic and Baltic countries altogether are 33 million. And 33 million metropolitan area of Tokyo is more than that. Delhi in India is close to that. Shanghai is catching up. Baltic countries alone is equal to New York. In a global population, we are about 0.42%. But at the same time, in terms of GDP development, obviously we contribute much more, about 2% of global GDP. And obviously, thanks to Nordic countries and the long-term development of Nordic countries, Baltic countries are definitely catching up here a lot. Now, moving to next slide. What is the basis for our development? And looking at the education, in some ways, Baltic and Nordic both are well above OECD average. And Baltic Nordic have fairly similar scores in maths and science. Somehow on reading, we need to catch up. Not sure exactly what's behind that. And now let's look at the R&D expenditure on this next slide. So US and Nordic average is equal, leading the whole pack. Leading what's world average, leading what's EU average. EU average and China are very similar in terms of R&D expenditure. And Baltics have probably benefited a lot in early days from cheaper labor cost, keeping it as a competitive advantage. But these days are over or soon to be over. And we really need to catch up and learn from our neighbors what's the best practice, what is the right level, and what is the best investment to R&D expenditure.
Now it is time to move on to our next speaker. European Investment Fund has worked across Europe with many governments and has a lot of experience with making regions act together. EIF is here to share their experience and see what we can learn from that. And now, welcome to the virtual stage, Jurate Argelonite, the Fund of Funds Manager at European Investment Fund. The floor is yours, Jurate.
Thank you, Kadri. Thank you for inviting me to this very interesting and important forum. And it's amazing to see such a numerous participation from so many countries. And let's have a quick journey of what has been achieved so far.
All right, thank you.
What are the lessons learned
and watching the event from the Zoom.
How we can promote cooperation in reality, what works. So even these days, access to finance is a problem. We make regular surveys, and it's not a problem for one or the other region. It's a problem across Europe. And it's a problem in various sectors. So it could be an innovative startup, or even a high growth scale-up, or a social entrepreneur in Austria. Many good ideas cannot get funded. And that's why the public investors have a major role to play. So EIF has been created to target the funding gaps. And we are designing various programs, and we work in various sectors and countries. And our role as an investor is also to bring the returns. And that's why the equity investments have a major role to play in this field. So we are identifying the market gaps, and then we cooperate with the member states. And by doing so, we create fund of funds, and we invest in the selected funds, bringing along private investors so that more money is available for the ecosystem for investments. One of the great examples is the Baltic Innovation Fund, where we reached out to the Baltic states, and we brought all three countries together to cooperate. We pooled the resources, so we created a fund of fund, And with 130 million euros with the first fund, which we launched almost 10 years ago, we invested in the selected funds, and we attracted the interest from the private investors to look into this market, to look into this asset class. And therefore, we managed to leverage the amounts up to 500 million, over 500 million euros to be invested in the Baltic region. And actually, more importantly, it's not only the Baltic region that benefited. There are also investments done in the Nordics as well. So that's one of the examples. And we started working as EAF on the horizontal level, EU-wide programs for innovation and growth. And through the years, by analyzing the gaps, what is needed in the markets, we also moved on to sector-specific programs and to the regions to work on the gaps that are existing there, to bring the private investors along. And one of the key elements that we developed was also the multi-country mandates. So looking at the picture, how the regional and multi-country mandates where we work look right now, I have to mention that this map shows also the debt mandates, because we work also on the guarantee side. We have another arm, the funding instruments that we are using is guarantees and debt funding. And then the other arm is equity investments. So this map is covering all the activities that we do in the regions. But more importantly, we have the regional mandates, and these are the equity fund of funds that we developed so far. We started 10 years ago, and this was not an easy journey to start with. And it happens so that in some of the countries, in some of the regions, we had very good discussions, and we thought that we are making progress to launch the new interesting regional multi-country mandate. However, we didn't succeed 10 years ago. It might happen that we will succeed in the future, but at that time, maybe we were still too early coming with a proposal. So the Baltic Innovation Fund was the first multi-country fund of fund that we have launched with several Baltic countries cooperating together. And thereafter, we launched successor fund of fund, because based on the success of the first one, we saw the need in the market to continue this good initiative. In addition, we also have another one, which is for Central Europe. And there, countries are cooperating together to develop the regional ecosystem in Central Europe. And the experience so far is very positive in multi-country mandates. It is important to agree and align the expectations of the participating countries, so that everybody then has the same expectations. They are all aligned, and there are no hiccups later on that somebody expected completely different things when agreeing to join and cooperate together. And drawing the lessons learned, or what we see as the added value and benefits of multi-country approach, we believe that cooperation is really a very efficient tool, because first of all, it allows funds to have access to a better deal flow, which is more important to bring the private investors alongside. For private investors, the important thing is to maximize the returns. And therefore, when the funds are allowed to invest across the regions, not in one country, they become much more attractive, much more interesting to the private investors. So then they have an increased access to the larger LP-based private investors. And this kind of multi-country approach, when we have the initiative focused on the region, not on one country, also stimulates the creation of new teams. This is what we saw in these regions where we already launched these multi-country fund of funds. It also increases the capital to the local companies. So it works positively in many directions. First of all, what also is very positive for the region is the vibrant regional ecosystem in the long run, and it creates a more resilient industry because it does not depend on one single country investors. And moreover, then we have a coordinated policy actions across the region. So the countries do not compete with each other, but they are cooperating and this brings value added to the whole region. So let's look at the status where we are in these days overall and what has been achieved so far. The equity fundraising has doubled in the recent years, and if we compare to what has the amounts raised in 2010, it has more than quadrupled. And moreover, the venture capital fundraising is also taking speed, and VC funds are raising much more private capital than before. Venture capital funds are less dependent on the public funding, and private investors now are comprising almost 85% of the investor base. So it became an interesting and attractive asset class for the private investors. However, the capital raised by European startups is much higher. The amount is much higher. It's almost 40 billion euros that European startups were raising in 2019. And this shows that still later stage startups are highly dependent on foreign investors, so non-European investors. And this problem has been already acknowledged as a very high structural weakness of the European market, and that we lack large size funds to back scale-ups in Europe. So we are working on this side together with European Union, and in the future we have launched a pilot already, and the funding will be also foreseen in the future for this, to solve this market gap. In addition, the number of unicorns has grown as well. And now most of the unicorns are VC backed. So that's already an achievement for the European market. And this also shows the development of the European market, of European VC ecosystem, that it's becoming more mature. And that's natural that it takes time. So European ecosystem is much younger as compared to US. And therefore, no one can expect that in the first years we already have the same results as the United States, but we are catching up. The number of startups launched in Europe is already outpacing the US. So we have larger number of new startups in Europe than in US, and this is a very good sign. Moreover, the unicorn conversion rate is actually similar to the conversion rate that startups have in US. And let's have a quick look at the Central Eastern region, Eastern European region, which is the youngest ecosystem in Europe. And it's the youngest, but it's already very vibrant. It's very active. It attracts a lot of venture capital investments, and the investors are interested to look into the new emerging teams. Moreover, this ecosystem has already 15 unicorns, and for example, Skype as one of the first ones in this region is a good example of Nordic and Baltic cooperation as well. It's a great example of cooperation where the founders from various countries can build a great company together. So what is coming next? I think everybody is questioning what is to be expected. And Europe has to join this transformative changes and more focus will be put on climate, on ESG and SDG, as this is a global problem and we cannot ignore it. There will be also focus on sustainability and impact, and we will look at more targeted interventions. So for a program for large, to support large funding rounds for scale-ups is one of the examples that is necessary and very useful and needed. So we are working on the future programs. Actually, we are also on the horizontal level. We are discussing with the Commission and later on this year, new programs should be launched, the so-called InvestEU framework. But at the same time, we're also working at the multi-country level, multi-regional dimension to promote the regional ecosystems, to develop them, and altogether we have to work on the substantial progress that has been made in the recent years, not to lose this momentum. So alignment between the public and private investors can become a competitive advantage in Europe.
Hi, and thank you, Jurate, for such a good overview. We have time to take a few questions. So first on, do you see governments being more open for cross-border cooperation?
Well, not everywhere. So I think Baltics and Central Europe are those examples where we managed to easily convince the governments to cooperate and work together. But in other cases, the governments are still very focused only on their own country. And actually, this is one of the major drawbacks of these national strategies, because what we hear from the fund managers is that they are very limited in terms of geography. The strategies that the countries have, in many cases, they limit the investments of the supported funds only to their own geography. And then the fund managers, they are not able to invest in the best opportunities that they have access to otherwise. And therefore, even their strategies are not that interesting to the private investors, because these might bring the suboptimal returns. So one of the elements that is very important even for the single country strategy, investment strategy in the country is to enable the fund managers to invest cross-border. So to let the capital flow freely across the borders.
Okay, good. What would you say are the key obstacles for governments to work together on cross-border market development initiatives?
It's not easy to answer this question because it might be specific to one country or the other. So the larger countries, let's say for France, it's not a problem as such. You know, they have already a vibrant ecosystem and a big market. So the countries that, like France or Germany, having a big developed market, they don't feel a need to cooperate, right? For the smaller countries with the more limited markets, I think it's very important to cooperate.
Okay, thanks. Then a few more. What comes usually as the best surprise after the cooperation with governments has started?
So far, I have to say that we have very positive experiences. So it's the same as investing into the funds. You know, if you get to know the team well and you set the expectations right, then everybody is aligned and has the same expectations and is happy with the outcomes. So I think it's very important to really, when structuring these kind of programs, to agree on what is expected and what has to be delivered.
Okay. And then the final question we can take at the moment, could, for example, private investors participate in Baltic Innovation Fund?
So for the Baltic Innovation Fund, initially we had an idea that even the private investors can participate at the fund-of-fund level, but for the Baltic market, as it was very young, only developing ecosystem, we didn't want to compete with the private investors investing at the funds level. So we kept it just open for the private investors to be active at the underlying funds level. But otherwise, yes, it is possible. It is possible in the other fund of funds to participate also at the fund of fund level.
Okay. Thank you so much for sharing your experience, Jūrate. And now we're going on a short break. So we will see you again at 3:30.
Thank you.
Hi, and welcome back, everybody. In first part of our today's event, we heard already a lot of insights from entrepreneurial point of view, what it takes to raise money from US, from Europe, what Nordic and Baltic region should do together. And we heard from EIF what it takes to create multi-country strategies, what are the benefits and opportunities in it. Now, before we head into our next panel, we look at some more data. First of all, it's incredibly important for every ecosystem that ease of doing business is highly ranked. And again, Nordic and Baltic countries are quite close in the back. Probably there are many ideas to learn from each other and to implement, but overall, we are very well positioned as ease of doing business to create a vibrant and even better ecosystem. Now, in next slide, we look something that is really important in nowadays agenda. Sometimes talking to LPs, the first question is not about returns, but about sustainability and what can we do about it. And Nordic and Baltic countries are incredibly strong in that front. We are leading globally the pack. And of course, it's easy to say we are doing well. Is it enough? Being even number one, it's never enough. Now, while doing it all, we look at a little bit of funnier data as well. And next slide is telling us how much we enjoy what we do. And it's a global happiness index, where Finland is topping it all. And I wonder why Estonians like to travel to Finland so much. We have a lot to learn about happiness, and maybe we feel ourselves happier in Finland. But it goes back to Johan's point that he concluded. It must be fun. We must enjoy it, and we must get a lot of fun out of it. Now, heading to next, and
yes.
Apparently really happy panel.
Yes, just wanted to say that most probably we're gonna see now a lot of happy people. So we're gonna see a roundtable discussion to tackle what are the synergies and how to improve these synergies in the Nordic-Baltic market further. May I present the roundtable members? Moderator of the roundtable, Sami Lampinen, chairman of Finnish VCA and founding partner of Inventure. Rasmus Thomsen, strategy and development team lead at Vaxfonden. Mona Lotte Theorell Christofferson, chairwoman of Swedish VCA and CFO of Stena Sessen. Rokas Petulaitis, chairman of Lithuanian VCA and founder and managing partner of Contrarian Ventures. And Tanya Marvin Horowitz, partner of Butterfly Ventures and deputy board member for the Finnish VCA. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Kadri. Big thanks to Estonian Venture Capital Association, Margus and Kadri. You've done a stellar job in putting all of us behind the Nordic-Baltic momentum. I'm really happy to chair this roundtable. We try to make it as lively discussion as possible. We have a super good selection of individuals with long careers in the private equity side. And very briefly, of my background, I have about 25 years of experience in investing in Nordic technology, early stage companies. I'm the founder of Inventure. We started as a 3-member company, and now we have a team of 15, and we are actually doing deals in all the countries in the Nordic-Baltic region. I've been also at the board of directors of the Finnish Venture Capital Association and the chairman now for 2 years, and my biggest personal objectives is to increase diversity across the entire asset class, not only on gender male split, but also in terms of asset classes, attracting different types of LPs into different type of private equity products. Also, other topic is boosting internationalization, international syndicate, making Nordic-Baltic venture and private equity scene even more international hub for international LPs, even from global domains. In the roundtable, we want to address and learn a little bit from the best practices, some of the very personal experiences that how we have seen the Nordic-Baltic region already working really nicely, and what kind of opportunities we see in the next years really make the region fly. What kind of initiatives we could propose? Do we come up with task forces? What kind of action points could we present to a variety of stakeholders, GPs, LPs, policymakers, government entities, also regulatory officials? There is a lot to be done. And we are in a good growth momentum. I believe in all the countries. If we look 10 years back, we are more than 5 times higher in volume. We are able to attract a lot of international money to portfolio companies. We are seeing many unicorns in the technology field. We are seeing super successful IPOs from the buyout side. But still, the local pools of money, if you look at across the region, all the countries, the amount of local funds and the local money put into local companies, we have not been able to grow that tenfold in the past 10 years. We probably have been doing quite okay, maybe 2 times, 3 times a larger amount of money from local funds into local companies. But we really want to see that as one of the opportunities in this roundtable to really capture that. Is there more to be done in making our region even more attractive base for global LPs, and what would be needed in that one. With that introduction, I would be super happy to give a floor to our roundtable members. And since venture capital and private equity is all about people and persons around it, people's business, as many want to say, I want to have the board members, the roundtable members, give a little bit of a perspective where they come from, what they do today, what kind of organizations they represent, and see how they address the Nordic-Baltic momentum from their personal perspective. So if we start from Mona Lotte, please go ahead, and then you can do it in random order after that.
Yes, and I was very glad to see the number that Sweden is actually number 1 in the sustainability index that you showed, Marcus, to start with, because that's something we work with very much in the Swedish VCA right now, about the sustainability and also the gender diversity initiative. And I can talk more about that later. But my background is that I started my career with working with auditing in KPMG with large financial companies, and then followed by working with Investor AB with large listed companies. And the past 12 years I spent in the private equity industry in Scope, and it's as admin partner and CFO, and we work with small entrepreneurial companies in the growth segment. And since 1 year, I am with Stena Sessan, the CFO, and that's a private investment company to invest in growing sustainable companies with a long-term horizon. And in my view, I truly believe that private equity and venture capital has a unique opportunity to build better companies. And private equity owners have a long-term view of the companies. Private equity owners have influence, and private equity owners have the means and capital and network to really ensure that we contribute to sustainable and better companies. And I'm really happy in my role as chairman of SVCA to spread knowledge and facts about what good things we do in the industry to build better companies. And a few words about Stena Sessan. We invest in growth companies, and one example is Voi, and we heard earlier today about Bolt. So Voi is one of the competitors in the micromobility industry. We also invested in Budbee, which is a last mile company for e-commerce businesses. We also invest in Exeger. It's a solar cells which provide a flexible material to put into consumer products, and they just launched a helmet for cycling, which can be charged by solar cells and thereby not using battery power at all. And my experience from the Baltic industry is actually in 2018 within Scope. We made an investment in Miss Mary, an underwear lingerie companies, which had 100 employees in Tallinn with sewing these lingeries of good quality. And actually my experience from the investment was that it was quite cumbersome, the administrative process, and also the loans, where we had Swedbank at the time, and they were scrutinized of the anti-money laundering regulations. So there was very much formalities in the signing and sanitary power to register, and a lot of work from lawyers. So if I could wish something, a harmonization of these company registration acts and corporate information and reporting procedures would be very welcome.
Thank you, Mona Lotte. Would it be Tanya to go then next?
I guess you're letting the ladies go first, huh?
Well, I guess so.
No problem. Sami, thank you, and thanks for the opportunity to Estonian Venture Capital Association, and also Karma, obviously, for having me here today. So I'm a partner at Butterfly Ventures. I will give a little bit about my background first. 25 plus years in financial services. I started out as an asset manager, and then went into investment banking as an M&A banker on Wall Street for almost 12 plus years. I got into venture capital due to my love during the banking world of working with early stage technology companies, and started my first fund in New York City in 2012. That fund today, of course, is 8 plus years old, but we've done super well with it. I invested across the US, but also was able to move to Stockholm in 2013, and then was able to also invest through that fund, CAPE, into Nordic companies. So we ended up, out of the 18, having 4 Swedish, 2 Finnish, and an Icelandic company as well in that fund. Today, that fund's done super well. I mean, I've had 5 exits, and the best exit actually came from Finland. So a company called Small Giant Games, which was an amazing exit story. But then I started talking about staying here in the Nordics with my husband, and we decided to do that. And I had a co-investment through my fund in New York with a fund called Butterfly. And that's how I got to know the Butterfly guys, and they were primarily a Finnish-based deep tech fund at that point. And when I joined them in 2016, we raised Fund 3 together. And today we are pan-Nordic and Baltic. So my 3 Finnish partners handle Finland and the Baltics, and I, again, reside in Sweden, so I handle Sweden, Norway, Denmark, and Iceland. Today we have over 84 companies that we've invested in. 27 companies of those are in the Fund 3 that I had just joined with in 2017. And our portfolio market cap today with those 84 companies are just around €1 billion at this point. So we are raising Fund 4 now, €60 million, and very excited to do that because we feel there's so many amazing opportunities that we're seeing not only across the Nordics, but the Baltics. And I think that this conference and event couldn't be better timed because of the opportunities. And, you know, as we'll get talk about it a little bit further, obviously, in the conversation, but, you know, seeing the perspective from me coming as an outsider from the US and seeing the venture capital system there, and then seeing what's been happening here since, you know, I started investing has been truly a unique experience, and we'll be happy to share those thoughts with you at a later time. I'll wrap up by saying a couple things about myself. We were told to talk a little bit of personal stuff. So I'm an avid tennis player, and I keep active off the tennis court by running after my 3-year-old son. So yeah, it's a lot of fun, but a lot of work. But thanks, guys, and we'll talk soon.
Thanks. And would it be then Rasmus?
Yes, thank you, and thank you for the opportunity. This is a really great. It's a really great event, and also time to speak about this has just been mentioned by my colleagues. I come from Vækstfonden, and for those of you who don't know that little bit weird word, Danish word, Vækstfonden is the independent sovereign investment fund of Denmark. We are a partner that do both debt guarantees, equity, direct, indirect. So we have the whole broad range of instruments. We've been around since 1992. We also work today as a sustainable investor. So our thesis is that a business needs to be sustainable to be relevant in 30 years. That I'm sure is also something we will get back to throughout the discussion today. Besides our own mandates, we also manage several mandates from pension funds and fund of funds in Danske Kapital 1, 2, and 3. And we try to build a coherent ecosystem from pre-seed, where we're bridging the gap between hard and soft money through accelerators, business angel programs, together with the IF, for instance, to later stage venture and growth. Of course, we are measured on more than our return, but our average return on equity has the last 5 years been 15%. And yeah, we see ourselves as a long-term partner willing to take risk. Something that I also like to get back to is that we really believe that the public sector can act as us as an independent fund, but still coming from the public sector, act on market terms. And we do only work on market terms to build new markets, to build new unicorns, and not as a substitute or as public substitute. Myself, I come as a background actually a bit more from the public side. I worked as a diplomat for 5 years in Brussels, working with the EAB, EIF, been working in the Ministry of Finance. And since working in Vækstfonden for 3 years, I've been working with our strategy and business development. The latest is, besides a lot of COVID-19 response, been the Green Future Fund of Denmark, which is a 25 billion Danish kroner fund, or in euro 3 billion approximately, which is mandated with investing and financing the green transition by both accelerating the implementation of known technologies and develop new solutions that are needed to get to zero emission economy by 2050. I would love to, I really look forward to talk more about how to create a coherent ecosystem, and also how to place the Nordic hub in an international setting. Of course, as Vækstfonden, we do have a national angle, a Danish angle, if you will, in everything we do, but we do invest internationally and also have a man on ground in Silicon Valley, for instance. So we both work together with Silicon Valley Bank. We've invested in Alderton. We worked with Antler. We worked with a lot of different funds throughout Europe and the US. And it's all to build and connect the Danish and Nordic ecosystem in a globalized world. Thank you.
Give us some energy. Good.
Being the last one, so I'll try to be short because I wanna have a lot of time for our discussion. So I'm Rokas. I wear two hats. One as a chairman of Lithuanian Venture Capital Association, and the other one is I'm a founder of Contrarian Ventures. We're in short an early stage hands-on fund focused on sustainable energy transition, investing across Europe and Israel. Launched in 2017, we have 17 portfolio companies, primarily focusing in energy and mobility. I think two words that are important in the sentence how I present us is community and hands-on. So we're a younger group of people. We have venture partners in London and Netherlands, and headquartered in Lithuania with my other partner Thomas. And community is quite in the DNA, I think, of our firm. So we run one of the largest conferences on sustainable energy transition called Energy Tech Summit. We also just recently launched Climate 50, which is an initiative to basically gather all the investors and raise awareness for LPs. I think in a topic that we believe is very important. Started in 2017 when probably climate was not a popular word. I think it's definitely getting more notice, and we're excited to be here. So I'm super excited again to be with such an accomplished group of people to discuss where we're heading next.
Thank you, Rokas. Okay, then I would like to capture a little bit what Rasmus was mentioning about the Nordic-Baltic hub, some of your initiatives, some of the insights that you've seen as an LP. If you start from that one, and if Mona Lotte as a growth and buyout related investors, if you can share a little bit of your learnings and best practices that you have seen, and also what could be relevant for Nordic-Baltic becoming a stronger hub.
Yes. So Vækstfonden, I think, as a national promotional institution, has of course quite political mandate to focus on the Danish ecosystem, and just to say that it's not been easy. You can quite easily imagine politically to do the argument that you need to have an international focus with the end state and taxpayers' money, but we happen to do so, and the history for us says that every 1 krona or euro we invest abroad has been brought 4 or 3 times or 3-fold back to Danish companies. So by practice, we have proven that this is also like a good business for even from a national point of view. But more importantly, it's also important, for instance, if you look at new initiatives as an LP investing in funds, that often even the Danish ecosystem isn't strong enough in itself, I would say, to sustain its own, for instance, university fund. So there we have been LP in a new fund called EIR, which is a Swedish-Danish fund connected to universities in Copenhagen and Lund, and so on and so forth. We were really looking at broad angles to connect the Danish ecosystem better across, of course, the Nordic Baltics, but also even with the US.
Yes, and I can comment on the Swedish market, and actually the market is well capitalized in Sweden, and really a lot of funds have been coming into the market. Over 31 billion euros has been raised in Sweden since 2017. And out of those, it's 2.5 billion only in the growth segment. So it's really a lot of money, and I think Sweden is number 4 in the fundraising in 2019 after UK, France, and Germany. And why is that? I mean, I think there are several reasons. And one is that Sweden is in the lead in the ICT and life science of goods value add. There's a strong academic and research community, and Swedes have been early adopting the digitalization strategies through political initiatives. Another fact is that there are good exit opportunities. We have a well-developed IPO market and a large growth PE sector. The ecosystem to go listing and delisting is well-functioning and well-functioning throughout the whole capital chain. And we have also a well-developed later stage VC sector. So, which, however, it could become even better to reach full potential. There are some things that we would like to be done. Maybe we can come back to that. It's about tax harmonization. It's about employee stock options and less bureaucratic employee laws to attract talents. And yeah, we can talk about that even more later.
Yeah, thank you. I'm very happy that you mentioned the IPO market, because Sweden is absolutely fantastic. How well Sweden has been able to kind of grow the listing market. So everybody certainly can learn from that one, and it well could be a Nordic-Baltic initiative to re-expand it further, make it easier for younger companies to do a listing in the joint market. That's for sure. Anything from Rokas and Tanya on the evolution, the market as of today, and also moving a little bit towards the opportunities? How attractive you see the market from a venture point of view?
I want to actually take a step, one step back, just as a narrative of thought. So I was probably one of the first generation to be born in independent Lithuania, which we yesterday had a restoration of Lithuanian independence. So born 1989, that's not a long time past, right? So only 30 years, and now Venture Capital Association, which I'm chairman of, was established in 2008. Probably one of the first venture capital funds were established then. So I think at the time I was just joining university and graduating from school. So funnily, where I'm going with this is that it's such a short period of time. I think majority of the funds that are in the Baltics are emerging managers, meaning that they're in their first or second generation of funds. And what I kind of find and see, it's very interesting, because from a fund perspective, if you look at the whole, let's say, Baltics or Nordics region, there's a good diversity of emergence and state where each ecosystem is. I think Baltics stand for more like the earlier stage ecosystems, and Sweden is more mature. There's more exits, more IPOs. I think that's where we're heading with the Baltics, with certain companies now. You know, the unicorns are growing each year, and we're seeing more maturity there. I think it's a great timing to reflect now that we only have 10 years since the first funds. So only the first ones that were raised in 2008 are now maturing to see some returns. I think that will give a lot of caution for foreign LPs to come in the region and actually come in to see in the leading managers in their second, third generation of funds, where they're not first-time funds, they're first-time managers, but there's already a track record behind them. And I think there's great opportunities from, again, deal size, deals that you can be looked, and I think we are seeing that more and more bigger funds from US and Europe are actually entering the market to come earlier, even before A round. So very, very interesting development, but I think always important to have a reflection that it's only been, 10 years for the ecosystem itself. So I think very great timing now, especially.
Yeah, and I'll chime in as well. I mean, I have a bit of a different perspective, I think, coming from the US, landing here in 2013, which the ecosystem here in my backyard, which was Sweden, and at the time was obviously one of the most mature ones at that time, but it still really wasn't, where things are today. I mean, it's quickly moved along. So when I came here, I went to all of the Nordic countries, and what I saw I thought was very fascinating. There were lots of different ecosystems within each country. I think, like, for example, even between Gothenburg and Stockholm today, there still is a bit of, a separation. And when I say that, I mean, a lot of the Gothenburg-based companies have to come to Stockholm to get funding, because there's not much in terms of seed funding for early stage companies in Gothenburg. So, there's the Almis, which are amazing, which are all over Sweden. But there's definitely a disparity when it comes to these, I'll call them more rural or local ecosystems. And I think that's totally changed since 2013. I mean, I remember when I was trying to raise our second CAFE fund, though, from 2015, we couldn't do it from the US because people were in the US saying, well, I don't really know what's happening in Sweden and Finland and Norway and Denmark. There hadn't really been the big exits that we're seeing today. So the tune has totally changed. And in fact, I'm seeing a lot of US-based fund of funds taking interest in the region now. So we've come a long way, and thanks to a lot of the seed funding that we've had through Business Finland, which was the old Techis, Sam Invest here in Sweden, Investinor now this past year has a fund to fund program as well, and I think they've launched like 8 seed funds. I'm very close to the Norwegian ecosystem as well. We have two Norwegian companies ourselves, and we're very early stage investors. So having those potential co-investors, such as the Almies and the Investinors and the Business Finlands of the world, is also angel groups. I shouldn't forget to talk about angel groups, because like for here in Stockholm, it's Stoaf. I think those are very, very important groups as well. And then you get, we're deep tech investors, which is, and I think we discussed, how they're in Sweden in particular, there's a lot of the research and that's coming out of the universities. We see that Nordic-wide and inclusive of the Baltics, of course, as well. And, I think there's a lot of similarities. I do see that there's still some issues with Sweden investing in Sweden, Finland investing in Finland, but that is totally changing. And when you have a pan-Nordic fund like Butterfly is, you have the opportunity to really bring those communities together. And, I come from a banking perspective in private equity and whatnot. So I kind of looked at the Nordics and I said I couldn't invest in just Sweden. It has to be the entire region. And I think, for better or worse, that's what I think that people should start thinking about, and how do we communicate that? I think we do it through the funds and exactly what we're doing. I think we're on the right track. And then we can, the co-investors that we've had in our third fund, for example, they come from mostly the region. It's a really good sign. So we've had investors, invest in from Sweden into Finnish companies and vice versa. We've had investors coming in from, Europe, for example, and even Techstars. We have 4 of our companies that have been in Techstars programs. So that's, US based. So, it's really great to see that the world is seeing this, as a ecosystem or an ecosystem together. And, those co-investors do come here for the later stage for sure. But that's just a little bit about my thought process on what I've seen since I've been here. And I do believe we're on the right path.
Maybe. Very good. You mentioned about pan-Nordic-Baltic venture fund. Also capturing the idea what Rasmus was saying, that investing 1 krona out of Denmark brings 4 crowns back to Denmark. Since we all know that we don't have that many LPs that are so-called pan-Nordic LPs or pan-Nordic-Baltic LPs. Is there a chance that we could break the kind of more national boundaries, taking a higher view on the Nordic-Baltic, possibly through fund-of-fund structures, working with big LPs, trying to really convince even outside Nordic-Baltic LPs joining forces and placing relatively big tickets into the region in terms of making sizable tickets for the funds that could then take our investments to the next level. Any views on that?
I think one.
I think it's.
Sorry, go on.
Sorry, Rasmus. I'll just say one quick thing. We're currently fundraising, and it's even during COVID, it's had its challenges, but there was a lag time. But I have absolutely seen, since I'm responsible for a lot of the out of the Nordics LP interest. I do see, when I do look internally though, that a lot of the Norwegian investors that we've been talking to really only invest in Norway. Sweden's a little bit more open. Denmark, I think, is really they seem to be quite open, and Finland, in my opinion, has been the most open. Just from what I've seen high level from our LP responses. But like I said a few minutes ago, we're seeing a lot of inbound coming in for the region, which I think is super important. So to answer your question in very short, Sami, I think there's a huge opportunity for a fund-to-fund for the Nordics. I think it's a great idea.
Rokas, you had the only one.
I have probably 3 observations that feed into the logic. I think that this fund would make sense. I think first one is to my previous kind of message that, the majority of funds are still emerging managers. The size is quite small of the funds, so sub 100 million funds. For the bigger LPs that come from US, like endowments, public pension funds, they usually look beyond like second, third generation of funds, as well as with the size that would not match them because they have to deploy large amounts of sums. So I think something like fund of funds would definitely make sense. Emerging managers as a group, as well as take into account how many unicorns this region has done for the last years, especially the IPO'd ones and soon to be IPO ones. Probably one of the best deals that we know come from countries that are not necessarily Western Europe. UiPath, a good example, right? It's probably going to be a fund maker for 3 funds, Early Bird, Seedcamp, and Credo. So what's interesting, I think, is these dynamics of different valuation that you can get, therefore higher performance for the funds, a lot of interesting emerging managers, and ability for someone to have a yield enhancement of backing the region into a fund-of-fund strategy would definitely make sense. And sort of the last interesting part to it is, especially Nordics and Baltics, what if you compare it to Western Europe or the general average, I think there's just returning entrepreneurs, so serial entrepreneurs coming back to build companies, and that is definitely what UK was built on, or Germany as a country. So returning entrepreneurs, or from big groups of people that were super successful, like Rocket Internet in Berlin, which build a plethora of companies. So I think that is already happening in Sweden with Spotify. That is definitely happening in Estonia with Bolt, Pipedrive, and others. And we're seeing, given that we're in Lithuania, we're seeing the same exact thing. And this is definitely a very interesting phenomenon. I think fund-of-fund strategy definitely is something that, every LP that wants to have a balanced ability to back these unicorns that are, made in not necessarily typical countries where it was over the last 10, 15 years ago.
And maybe if I can add to that,
go ahead.
No, actually, just first, I would just want to take one step back, and it's also a little bit to do with the COVID-19, because if I was asked, well, it's not only a year ago, but a little less, what would happen with doing COVID-19 and the venture and private equity market, most people will not afford something different than actually happened. That we can see that 2020 has been as strong as 2019, which was a record year in Denmark and even in the Nordics in Europe. And the latest number for January 2021 has been by the largest venture investment activity in Denmark ever recorded. So the market is red hot right now. And even more encouraging, it's also new investment hasn't fallen, as you might have imagined. But I think to the idea about a pan-European or pan-Nordic, more specific pan-Nordic fund, yes, we also see the need for that, and also especially also connecting the Nordics. But also there's an interesting theme in that venture capital is both a global phenomenon, but it's also locally anchored. You need a venture capital fund that knows the local ecosystem and can really be the partner with the startups, with the company, because that's also another insight that's also really seen over the last couple of years, is that the competition is not so much now on the company side. It's more between the investors who can really bring value add to the company. But at the same time, you need an investor who really needs to know the local environment and the specificities of Göteborg and Stockholm and Copenhagen and Aalborg and so on and so forth. You also need them to be global anchored. As a startup today should think global from the startup. So a fund forward is also good in that sense, that it can kind of bridging between the local and the global. And then I also think when we're looking at Nordic-Baltic, you can't overestimate the importance of unicorns like Spotify, Skype, and etc. And we have the new ones coming up with Klarna and so on. not only for the company itself, but for the whole ecosystem as such, be a flywheel or flight carrier or whatever you would call it. But that's really something we should be focusing on as well, how to create the next unicorns at the same pace as we do today, but also maybe have a little talk on about how to keep the valuation in the Nordics. Because I would also like to touch a little bit about the value leakage problem we have a little bit with the US.
Yes, and I can just comment also about the fund programs that I see in Sweden. The trend is, I don't think there's a policy on the government level, but the trend is to invest more in fund strategy rather than investing in local or smaller funds or startup companies. I mean, the government don't have to build up their own competence or administrative organizations for that. So I think that's a good way to go. And I would also say that it's important that Nordic-Baltic level is fine, but also on an EU level, it's really important to see that we have harmonized rules and regulations on an EU level and really be aware and try to stop harmful decisions such as the EU initiative on tax and digitalization services, for example. It's really, that's where we can also put efforts in seeing that the EU makes good harmonization on all regulations and tax. So I think that's where we should put our efforts.
Thanks, Mona Lotte. Then I may also turn to Kadri, whether there are any questions. We have still at least the sustainability theme that we want to address a little bit, but in case of any one or two questions, we can try to squeeze in quickly if you can prepare. But meanwhile, I would probably turn a little bit to a discussion around it, that what's the kind of dream scenario that you would like to pitch to LPs on a 2030? What could the industry or the region look like if we take a one fund lifetime 8 years ahead? What kind of a dream scenario we could capture and then present it in front of future LPs? A little bit of a
Sami,
forward
just a very quick update from Kadri here from the studio. Let us give you 10 minutes for the discussion and 5 for questions. So there's an extra 15 for you guys. So we can have the break smaller. Yeah, smaller break after that.
That's appreciated. So we can still continue with this dream scenarios and then how the region could look like, and then we take the Q&A after that.
Yes, sure.
Maybe Rokas has something at least on the sustainability theme. Muted?
Yeah, sure. So I think just one note, I think, from the dream scenario. I think what's interesting is sort of when I look back in sort of 2012, 2014, the topic in every other conference was to build a new Silicon Valley somewhere else. Now, probably with the COVID even more so, there's not about chasing a location, right? So I think what's interesting for us as I think ecosystems are, and we kind of tend to see from different countries, is this some sort of specialization, I think, in certain sectors. While ICT, for example, is obviously still the big trend, but we can go deeper in some specific subcategories like transport, being one example, energy, medtech, which is obviously biotech, with one important as well. I think there will be some great leaps towards this region becoming one of the leading ones in certain one of them. And fintech could be one of them as well, and Swedish success in Klarna, or like I think Lithuania specifically positioning as a regulatory framework point. What's interesting for me is the collaboration of these companies. And I think while I'm very super excited, we have one Swedish company and they actually opened an office in Lithuania, which is going to be their dev office. And these also synergies open up great opportunities for, you know, working together and building companies that then go to conquer Europe. And I think there's been that great synergy between Finnish and Estonia. I think there's more and more happening between Norway, Sweden, between other Baltic countries. I think working relationships are best relationships to work on, and I think when time proves those, there's joint successes that can be also cherished. So I certainly believe there needs to be more interrelationship and more deal making between different countries, and I think that's what brings great relationships and successes together to this region altogether, not to a specific country. So I'm in pro of less nationalism, more regional positioning for sure on that note.
Thank you. Okay, and anyone else wanna fire up the dream scenario 2030?
If we talk about dream scenarios, let's also talk about sustainability, because I think those two are kind of connected, and also especially with the Nordic position. In the next 30 years, the Earth's population will grow by 2 billion, but even more importantly, the food demand for food supply will grow by 60%. We have the technologies today, but also need to develop the new ones to actually address these things. And one thing that's also common, and also to the introduction to this panel, is that the Nordics is really well suited, established for that. So I agree, Rodri, that we shouldn't only focus on one specific location in the world or be the new Silicon Valley, but I could say that I think instead of chasing Silicon Valley, we could create a Nordic hub that could be the focal point for sustainable solutions and technologies that can underpin this. So that would be a dream scenario from our side. And then, of course, you can only agree that less borders, more cross-border, the better. And then we can also talk about specific initiatives to do that. But the vision should be to be the hub for the sustainable revolution in the coming years.
Yes, and I would like to take up that thread also on sustainability. And in my view, private equity and venture capital is really the catalyst to make sustainable companies and to help entrepreneurs to become sustainable and to build the best companies in the world. And that's why we also within the SVCA, we have a project now to really show the media and politicians and other interested parties that private equity, what we do in sustainability. So we're collecting KPIs from all the large players in Sweden, and we're making a report on to show how we work with these sustainability issues and what numbers we can present. We're not there yet, but we have been working with it for a long time, and we are serious about it. So we would like to show that this sector is very good in providing sustainability in the world. And we also have another initiative that we're very excited about. It's about, together with NASDAQ and Albright, an organization working with diversity. And it's an education program for all listed companies and all private equity-owned companies in Sweden, together with the Nordic VCAs, to provide education on diversity matters and how can we provide more diversity in the boards and in the company managements. And that's important for growing companies to really be aware from start to really be diverse and then thereby be better companies and better performance on all stages. So that's the dream scenario, that we can show all the world that the private equity and venture capital is the way to go if you want to build better companies.
Thank you very much. Yeah, go ahead, Tanya.
Do we have time?
Last remark. Yeah.
Okay, I'll try to make it quick. So I mean, as everybody knows, we're deep tech investors, and I really think that the region, the region already ranks, all the countries here rank in the top 10 in research and citable documentation. So a lot of the deep tech that we invest in comes from the university sector. Not all of it, but a lot of it does. And deep tech today, I mean, that's obviously AI, but it's also in the health. It's in every industry. It's in Industry 4.0. But what I think is interesting, we try to invest in companies that help solve the world's greatest challenges, and that lends directly to sustainability. And I think we have a gold mine sitting at our fingertips here in the region with regards to the competence that I personally see in a lot of the teams that are coming out of the universities or other. And I think, I'm not saying that we need to focus on deep tech. What I'm saying is that it is a part of I think, an underserved market, an undercapitalized market opportunity. So it's an area I think that is going to yield tremendous upside to the world as we know it in the future, and our children.
Very good. Thank you, Tanya. Now we are rounding up. Just the final remark, trying to capture the recipe for success, which of course, as venture capitalists always put, it's just to put the recipe in place or playbook and execute. So I clearly see what the fellow roundtable members have been pointing out there. With a little bit of more money, we could capitalize a higher amount of innovations and boosting entrepreneurs, and with a bit of less regulation that could actually help us collaborate and finding the synergies between the countries, even on a deeper and faster level, which would then help the companies grow faster. And with higher fund sizes, we could also avoid some of the valuation leakages and utilize local exit opportunities, either through IPO or corporate trade sales on a faster scale. And this could certainly be something that would add into a sustainability track that we could also have quite a high impact on these high growth startups, saving the world in the next decades to come. At this stage, I will thank the roundtable members. We may be tight on time, but now for the Q&A.
Yes, thank you, guys. It was such a fruitful discussion. I think we will have time for 2 questions. So the first one would be, how VC key people see the solution of the market failure in financing for the development of science-intensive business. I think it is more of a question towards the Baltic markets, because the Nordics is paving the way or showing the benchmark, but still a good question.
Anyone wants to? Does Rokas want to take it?
I can probably try from one angle. I think it's a bit of a tricky question. I think from a VC standpoint to answer it, I think there's been a lot of money come in science from non-dilutive in a form of grant financing, which I think really stretched the market to a level where I think there's a lot of science going on, but lack of commercialization, because it's not KPI driven. It's usually more an experiments. But I think there's more willingness to take risk at earlier stages. I can probably speak from our background as well. We've backed quite numerous companies that obviously were pre-seed or pre-product that went to the market and successfully capitalized on that science. But I think there's more and more. I think we don't need to come outside of the Baltics, right, or outside of the region. But there's more and more financing at earlier stages that is willing to back companies at earlier stages without proof of concept. So I think we shifted the whole funding cycle a bit notch back with more risk taking. As well, I think the problems that majority of these companies that are coming from science are solving are real problems. So it's not just another app or social app or productivity tool. This is really, really big problems that feed into the sustainability theme. And I'm super happy that there are some fellow investors coming from Sweden, someone like Norsken, to mention, for example, are willing to go and back these companies early stage with investors, especially understanding the specific topics and how to help these companies. I'm a big believer in specialist funds. I think being a generalist has never been harder than before, with the big funds raising significant amount of capital. There's not enough just saying you can add value. You actually have to add value to these companies that you partner, especially the earlier stages. And then I think there's never been more important community element of being successful and building a successful brand. Having money is literally the last thing that entrepreneur expects from you. So I think there's a great deal to be done in backing science, but I think you need to take your sleeves down and really go to do work to make it successful. So we next 10 years from now, we see IPOs in these sectors. And quite excited, to be frank, about SPACs and things similar, transactions that help companies without revenue to go public. So US is definitely way ahead of time, but interesting to follow.
Yeah, I would probably add on that one, because we have invested quite a bit of the science and deep tech related startups, you could say, back in the days. And what we didn't see always present was the really fast growth driven entrepreneur. Scientists, sometimes they go into a really great technology, they go into patented ideas, but sometimes the business moves faster, it moves in a different cycle. So that's why we have added quite a lot of value and power to building the right talent into those deep tech startups. So certainly the level of talent has to be there from all the layers, not only the science part of it, but building business, building partnerships, and also building the business model that is attractive for next funding cycles.
Okay. Thank you. And then we will have the final question, which you touched upon too a bit before, but the question is, Nordic-Baltic VC startup ecosystem is doing very well. However, the US is still the major exit market. How could we improve the regional exit market?
I mean, I can take a stab at that.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Tanya.
Sorry.
Tanya, go ahead.
I guess it's whoever speaks first, right?
Yeah.
I mean, look, the U.S. Most of the companies that I see, here in the U.S., they can't get funding in the local markets, or they want to grow quickly, and they see the U.S. as as a marketplace. The exits. You talk about we just talked about SPACs. They're great and wonderful, and it's like a SPAC market right now. But I do caution about those types of vehicles, I would call it, for funding. Luckily here in Sweden we have NASDAQ First North, which is a really great opportunity, especially for we talked about deep tech a minute ago. We as well, I mean, that's what we do is deep tech and get in very, very early. And some of the companies, have to continue to get funded. And, if there's not that deep tech capital at a certain level, Series A or whatever, they might have to go to a NASDAQ First North or, to continue to fund. How do we create the ecosystem here? I mean, I think that, you've also got the secondary markets, secondary players that I think are actually starting to infiltrate now, and we have more and more of those funds coming in, which I think also gives some additional and extra capital and liquidity to the market. But the U.S. is always, unfortunately, I think it's being a banker, an ex-banker. I think that they're going to continue to have that. I'm not saying that London or the Nordics here can't equate that, but I think there's a certain level, where you kind of Spotify go public here can, Sammy, you can probably talk about your journey with Bolt and how that whole situation, but it's, I think that, when you get to the larger billions of dollars, it's hard to compete with the US unless we can get that infrastructure set here.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Once again, thank you.
So guys, It was really interesting to listen your thoughts, and then we could continue for hours, I guess. So, but we have to stop as we're going now for a small break, and we'll be back at 4:35. So everybody stay safe and see you again, hopefully. Again, welcome back. We are now moving on to our next and final panel, which continues to analyze LP activity in the region. So let us give a very warm welcome to our panelists. Matthias Kaila, Head of Fund Investments at Tesi. Chris Wade, Co-founder and Partner at Isomer Capital. Emma Honganen, Investment Associate at EQ Group. Kristine Persina, Founder of Livonia Partners and Latvian VCA Chairwoman. And the panel will be moderated by Margus Uudam, Chairman of Estonian VCA and Founding Partner of Karma Ventures. The stage is yours.
Great. Before we head into the panel discussion, let's take a look at a few slides more. And on data points, what really comes as a surprising if we look at the private equity and venture capital investments to GDP, we see that Nordic is doing well above Europe, but Baltic seems to be a bit of outlier. It caught me by surprise as well, and Estonia is here to blame. A few of the success stories have raised really a lot lately and made Estonian investments to a 2% GDP level. And when I look at the next slide, which is a comparison of the investor types in private equity and venture capital funds, we see quite a difference. So obviously, CE region is still quite strongly supported by public investors. But Nordic investors have a really healthy share of foundations, endowments, and fund of fund and other asset managers' activity. The structure is quite different. And obviously, we need to look much more into it. Is there one dominant fund of fund who is doing most of it? Is there enough depth? Is there enough different strategies and areas of focus? So this is definitely more to explore. But now, going to our panel. Thank you all for joining. And Kadri made a quick intro who you are, but it would be great still hear a bit more insight of what's the latest for you, what you focus on. And Matthias, what if we start with you? So Tesi has been really instrumental in building the ecosystem in Finland. And what's the mission you are on? And what's next steps for Tesi?
Thanks, Marcus. What's next for Tesi? Of course, as you mentioned, we've been building a lot of the ecosystem in Finland, but we also see a lot of development ahead. We see the need for Finland to be part of the greater Northern European and European ecosystem, and therefore being able to benefit also for the success of the wider ecosystem. And this is where we are helping. So we are not just focusing on activities in Finland, but we are also partnering very actively with investors and ecosystem players outside Finland and ensuring those ecosystem players are well connected to the Finnish ecosystem. And also where we're focusing quite a lot is as an LP and as an investor, as we do both fund investments and direct investments, is that we are gathering a lot of information. We have, as a state investor, we have, one could say, even unfair resources in terms of being a public investor, but we try to bring it back to the ecosystem. So as a key part of our strategy, we are building on now on our own data, what we are accumulating through our investment operations, as well as consolidating different market data together and bringing that back to the market in order to increase the visibility in the Finnish ecosystem, but we're also building capabilities to also replicate that through the whole Nordics and Europe as well, if need be, in order to ensure that even the smaller investors who don't have the access to the deal flow, who don't have access to the market data, who could have the visibility to invest in the sector. That's probably in a nutshell what we're doing.
Great, thanks. Emma, you're a very professional investor in private equity and then have strong thesis on it. Why Nordics? Why private equity? Maybe you can give a bit of insight to your strategy.
Yes. So my name is Emma Honkonen, and I have been part of the EQ Asset Management private equity team since 2016. And EQ is a fund of fund manager, and we have a special focus on the lower mid-market buyout funds into Northern Europe. And the Northern Europe lower mid-market is the sector we have been concentrating for over 25 years now. So it's a long-term expertise we have gained in this sector, and that has been our investment focus for the long time period. EQ Asset Management is one of the largest independent asset manager in Finland, with total AUM of 9 billion euros, of which 4.2 billion is in private equity. So it's a remarkable part of the EQ Group's assets under management. And today our private equity team is managing in total almost 30 private equity fund of funds and client mandates. Our investor base consists mainly of Finnish institutional investors like foundation, universities, and smaller pension funds and insurance companies. And we raised our latest Northern European fund of fund last year, and we reached total commitments of 205 million euros, which we are currently investing.
Great, thank you. Kristina, you are investing in private equity in Baltics. So how do you see the market? How do you see the opportunities from GP perspective? You might be on a mute. Yes, we still cannot hear you yet. As you try to fix the audio part, what if I move on with Chris at the moment? Chris, Isomer is a sounds like kind of startup among fund of funds. You invest in early managers, emerging managers in Europe, and is it something that you do out of belief, or do you have data to prove as well that it can be really successful? So maybe few glimpses into Isomer.
Well, thank you, Margus, and thank you everybody for arranging a remarkably good conference, which I've enjoyed for the last 2 or 3 hours. Isomer is about a fundamental idea, and that is startups are not a national sport. When we set up Isomer in 2014, we thought it would be very interesting to have a fund of funds focused on where the majority of the capital was at that time in Europe, which was the UK, Germany, and France, and it represented about 66% of all capital. But we realized that this was an error, because Farfetch was created in Portugal. At the time, UiPath was emerging in Romania. TransferWise was becoming significant out of Estonia. Spotify was becoming very significant in Sweden. And we realized that Europe is this wonderful place where startup entrepreneurship can happen anywhere, because the fundamental tools available are available anywhere. So we built a startup, yes, fund of funds business to invest in Europe, invest in Northern Europe. We are very strong on the belief system of Northern Europe for all the reasons that you've heard. But this fundamental idea is we don't invest in Estonian VCs or Swedish VCs. We invest in Swedish and Estonian and Danish and Finnish VCs because they're investing in Europe. And they're investing, whether that's the whole of Europe or a part of Europe, but they're investing. The other thing that's a fundamental to this startup called Isomer is we are a platform for our investors to understand Europe. Our mission, beyond the boring of producing a good return and supporting the VCs that we back and investing in the companies that they invest in, is to enable new LP capital to understand Europe, to understand venture capital in Europe, which is not chasing the US. I forget who said it. We're not chasing Silicon Valley. We're building our very own unique ecosystem, which is equally as strong and in some cases has some preferential features to it, to that has gone before. So we're all about creating a diverse set of LPs who can enjoy the benefits of what clearly is a revolution in innovation and entrepreneurship, and sadly boosted by the last 12 months pandemic activities.
Great. Thank you, Chris. I have supportive voices in my head that we have Christina back with audio. So,
I hope so.
Yes, you're back. Great, thank you.
Good.
So, private equity investment scene in Baltics and you as a GP, how do you see it?
Well, hello everyone, and thank you so much for the opportunity to be here. Very nice to see you, Margus. So I'm Kristiina Berziņa. I'm one of the founders of Livonia Partners. We are a private equity fund investing in Baltic companies. And we have been investing for about a little bit more than 5 years now. So some 5 years ago, we were a first time fund. And right now we are on the route to raise the next fund. Let's say our strategy, where do we put our investments into, have not really changed since we started. We are looking for Baltic companies who are ambitious and want to grow internationally, or those companies who are working on local markets who either are #1 market leaders or are aspiring to be so. And we, of course, invest in people. It's not only about capital. The key is really about relationship and trust between us and the management teams and entrepreneurs we work with. So I think we are a generalist fund, given that we are in private equity and in relatively small economies. And I think half of our portfolio is in manufacturing, a big part of our portfolio is in technology. We have a retail company, so we have invested across several sectors. Speaking of the next fund, it's going to be more or less the same handwriting. Companies who are growing and have ambition to grow very, very quickly, and very courageous management teams. One big new theme for us is and will be sustainable investment, because we have kind of over the last years we have been discussing internally and figuring out how we can contribute. And what we came up with from the next fund to make a pledge to invest an amount which is at least 10% of the fund size across portfolio companies, investing to initiatives and projects which will have positive environmental impact, either through solving climate change or pollution or other environmental problems. Mm-hmm. So that's us.
Really great to hear. Thank you. Matthias, back to you. You have done a lot of data mining and research on the LP activity in Nordics. Maybe you can give us a bit insight. How does it look like? Is it diverse? Is it enough what we have as LP activity? And if not, what's the potential next steps?
Well, I think we have quite diverse base of investors in the Northern Europe, but I think the problem is a bit of a mismatch of a capital and who's getting access to it, and there's probably some things to it that might explain it to it. Now, of course, we have large pension funds in almost all the countries, especially in the Nordics, which are very strong and dominant, even to the extent that they're probably getting too big for the ecosystem, as Sami Lampinen pointed in earlier. So one of the earlier panel discussions about the fact that the local ecosystem, the fund sizes, they haven't been growing in the same pace as the balance sheet of the large investors in the region. That's one part of the mismatch, and also, because they're being big, they need to be diversifying their order, whether they're exposed in other asset classes into the region, for them to then make a suboptimal decision on their allocation process. It's very difficult for them to allocate the money in the sector. And of course, there's mismatch, especially on finding those investors able to invest 5 to 10 million which tickets to the fund, which is very, very crucial on many of the fundraisings to get to the target size, both in terms of VC as well as small cap and emerging teams in general. Typically, when we look at the fund sizes, below 100 million, and that's where the especially state investors are very crucial. I think what would be very beneficial for the region, and this is where I put it a bit bluntly, is that perhaps GPs as well as the large LPs would need to get out of the bubble in a sense, understanding that even though they have the visibility to the deal flow, they have visibility to the market, they would need to ensure that also smaller LPs across the borders would have the visibility, who's been raising funds at what time, who's about to come to the fundraise, giving more insight to what's really driving the value in the industry, what's really driving the returns, and not just the success stories of the unicorns, which are easy to explain, but what is really the fund model, what is really driving the returns beyond the unicorns as well. That would be very helpful. And sharing the context, I think more the LPs are exposed and the potential LPs are exposed to different discussion, the fundraising, different GPs, talking to LPs, and then also interaction between the larger LPs and smaller LPs, the more we are able to get the capital to the region. The region is, and the players in the ecosystem are highly codependent. and that should be acknowledged, and that's an effort that GPs and larger LPs should make for the ecosystem.
Thank you. And maybe back to Christina to discuss a bit also the Baltic LP activity and how it has developed. So it's definitely the development over the last maybe 5 or 7 years where we have seen a lot of activity. And we have also seen the risks related to it. Estonian pension fund reform, for example, which allows people to take money out of pension funds, has significant impact on our ecosystem and the ability for funds to raise next funds and keep providing capital to startups and entrepreneurs. So what is your take on the LP activity, how sustainable it is as we look at the Baltic only?
Having had conversations with our fund investors, having had conversations with our fund investors and other Baltic investors in the last 9 months, what we can see, what we have seen, clearly there is a lot of maturity across Baltic institutional investors. We are having very different conversations compared to how it was 5-6 years ago. And of course, we have been maturing, investors have been maturing. There is definitely a wider openness to alternative investment funds. It's on one hand, it's very nice to be in a position of not being the first time fund, and we are grateful to those investors who supported us during that time. And all of the investors are also pledging to support us for the second fund, which of course is a fantastic thing to have. So maturity, a much stronger focus on sustainability. In terms of some of the investors are saying this is fundamentally your approach to ESG is more of it's almost a hygienic factor. You just have to do it. You cannot not do it. Some of the investors are more proactive in terms of exploring how GPs and funds and private equity funds and venture funds investing into environmental initiatives, fair diversity and fair pay and other initiatives. Of course, on a risk side and negative side, no question, as this Estonian government's or former government's experiment with pension system, I think it has been widely regarded as one of the most uncontrolled experiments with pension systems in Europe. And there is caution from Estonian institutional investors. There is no question about it. Having said that, it's not that the Estonian investors are getting negative on alternative investment funds. They are still very keen to invest. But of course, right now, exactly, we are like 1 month away from the first deadline when the pension funds will see how much money people will withdraw.
And it's definitely an example how fragile the single country strategies or markets can be based on either economic developments or political changes or changes in legislation. So Emma, when we prepared for the call, you said you are not sure about venture yet, and private equity is clear. But what it takes actually for such a professional investor like you to start investing in venture, considering venture, having seen quite a few success stories coming out of Nordics and Baltics?
Well, at EQ, our strategy is quite clear that it's a lower mid-market buyout fund. So Of course, we review our strategy every year, but this is what we have been doing for 25 years. So moving to venture would require some, perhaps a different team or some other structure. But with the current team, I think our focus will stay in the lower mid-market buyout funds.
Yes. What's your view on data? Like, do you feel like if you decide to start investing in venture, do you have good enough data about systematically producing positive returns? This is an asset class you can sell, you can believe in. So how do you feel, how advanced is the venture ecosystem for you?
Well, of course, we met some venture capital players also, especially the Finnish one, once we want to be aware of the market. So I think we have fairly good information, but of course there could be more information, and especially for the smaller, less experienced investors, I think the venture capital investments might be a bit new thing, and it would be difficult to understand the value creation model. For example, for a buyout investors, it sometimes seems like a big leap of faith to invest in a company that is making a huge amount of loss, for example. So probably for the smaller private and family office investors, it must be one thing that they would need more information about the VC investing and understand better the ecosystem.
Yes, and data, leading role models, lead investors, everything would absolutely contribute it. Now, Chris, you are running fund of fund for a venture. How do you see how fund of funds potentially impact the ecosystem, and what benefits it might have for the ecosystem? Last panel was also talking quite a lot about the potential fund of fund logic for Nordic and Baltics. It's not just only money; it's probably more.
Yes, I think that's right. Look, I think where Europe ultimately needs to get to is a lot more private capital going into venture. And so we need to create a kind of working group, whether that's in the Nordics, the Baltics, the new Nordics, or more generally in Europe, is a matter for others. But what we can understand is that Europe is part of as I mentioned earlier, a revolution of young people creating tomorrow's technology leaders. And that is not marketing, that is fact. Already this year, Auto One in Germany has had a very successful multi-billion IPO. There are 2 or 3 scheduled that we're very close to in the UK that will be big IPOs. This is the next phase of European venture, where not only are companies of a similar interest and technology development to anywhere else in the world, but the outcomes are becoming similar. And so that is really important. Now, we always focus on these kind of conferences on those great big outcomes. But just this week, a Finnish company called AppGyver, which I think, Margus, you're familiar with, got acquired by SAP, an entirely European story that everybody's very excited about. And that is the day-to-day business of venture capital. And that is putting some money in and getting a 4 or 5 times return within a reasonable time period. We just hear about those enormous outcomes, but this is much more of the day-to-day. And I think what fund of funds who are already in existence, like Isomer, but there are others as well, should be offering to regions like the Baltics and the Nordics is a way of sharing some of the data, some of the thoughts, and some of the conclusions that we come to that make us invest in VCs with a great deal of conviction, and so far with some success. We have reviewed over 100 VCs in the Nordics and the Baltics. We know the track record, we know the data, we know everything about them. Now, obviously that's not our business to be sharing that, but I think having some way of being able to encourage other LPs to understand that potential and then decide whether it's for them would be a really, really good point. We pride ourselves at Isomer of being the least thing we are is capital. What we want to be is supporters, particularly of funds when they're starting their journey as a fund manager, in terms of all those things that you need to think about when you're building your firm, but also at the company level, helping the companies think about connecting with overseas LPs or overseas investors, particularly corporates that can help them. Because I do believe we're on a trend now where acquisitions are not just coming from the US, but also from Europe and other parts of the world. So it's much more deploying capital, which makes the fund of funds world a very exciting one.
And also through your activity, you have activated new investors, new LPs from Europe, but also you have a strong Japanese angle as well. So you develop the market additionally, bringing new LPs to market who later can build their independent strategies.
I'll be accused of being pompous and old-fashioned and all those things that people love to say about me. But I'm in my early 60s. I've had an entrepreneurial career. I've had a venture capital career. I've had an angel career. I could be putting my boots up now very nicely. But what drives me every single day, and my partners and colleagues at Isomer, is what we call, and here's the pompous bit, solving the last remaining problem in Europe for venture, and that is the number of LPs. Just the sheer number of LPs that are investing in venture, and that's what our mission is all about. It shouldn't be that some of our best funds still take too long to raise capital, or have to rely exclusively on government programs. And I don't want to be negative about those government programs. They've been vital, and they've become some of the most professional LPs in the world.
Yeah. So last panel was discussing a lot also the need to work together more as a region, Nordic and Baltic. And may I test also in this panel, where is the sense of urgency? Do you think it makes sense? Do you see opportunities in it? And from which angle the kind of thinking mostly is coming from? And again, it can be stepping back, looking at the competition like US and Europe. And even there are signs Europe is acquiring more European technologies, keeping value here as well. But US is still very, very dominant in acquiring European technologies and capturing all the value, taking away some of the tech talent. Is it just as some, and actually not some, but really many have you mentioned sustainability? We could do so much more, potentially sharing the best practices and implementing fast across the region, being still fairly small countries on the global scene. So how do you see the Nordic-Baltic cooperation sense of urgency and motivation for it? Emma, maybe you want to start.
Yes. Well, I think it would make much sense to further develop the Nordic-Baltic cooperation between LPs. I think it applies both on the private equity as well as the VC side. I think, for example, in Finland, we have fairly tight and close LP community among which we can share quite well the information and ideas, but the other countries, they probably have the similar communities, but I would like to see more cross-border cooperation between LPs. Of course, there is some at the moment as well, but it's mainly around some certain subject or certain investments. So to be able to exchange the ideas and views more freely, there should be more platforms to do that, like some events directed to Nordic-Baltic LPs where the ideas could be exchanged more openly.
Great.
And
yes.
I think the local investors have the best perspective to the development of the local PE scene. So sharing the best information within the area would help developing the ecosystem as well.
Kristina, what's your view also from Latvian VCA point of view? So how to see the opportunities?
I think in reality, nowadays capital doesn't have borders. It's as simple as that. Some 8-10 years ago, there were Estonian funds, Latvian funds, Lithuanian funds. Now all of the funds are Baltic funds in terms of attracting LPs, in terms of having investment strategies, at least Baltic funds. Many of the funds actually investing into European companies or much wider. So we are there, and it's only a matter of time while also the LPs cooperation will become more borderless. Let's put it in this way. And if we talk about like companies, the actual companies where we invest money into, there used to be a saying, corporate banks follow their customers. We have to follow our customers. We have built portfolio companies across borders. So we have invested into 2 Estonian companies who have consolidated companies in Finland. So it's just logical to go and expand.
Mm-hmm. Great. Matthias, you represent government institution, and for governments it's always very tricky topic to discuss investments outside of your home country. How to explain it to taxpayers? What shall we get back? And then from your point of view, it would be particularly brave step to initiate and work much more on cross-border activities and investment activities. What's your sense of urgency? What's your vision for Nordic and Baltic region?
Well, as you put it nicely, it's not easy. As you, of course, every national promotion institution, they have their policies behind, and politicians, having their incentives and their eye on what we do, and even the media. But of course, we need, first of all, the national promotional institution. We would need to be cleverer than we've been in the past. So we would need to be better on showing the impact what we are doing and the cooperation we are able to do cross-border, just beyond the capital, which is going back and forth. That's one thing to start. I think there's a lot of opportunities also for the national players who really know the ecosystem to be the bridge and between the countries, as we know all of the other national institutions and large LPs across. So in ensuring that there is the cooperation created among the different countries, and also ensuring that we ourselves are well networked in our own countries as well, in terms of whether it's university cooperation, so we get better start for the science-based innovation, whether it's being a better network with local larger corporates in order to be able to channel back and forth the expertise in various industries that we've been accumulating expertise in different countries. Because as you, Marcus, put it in the beginning, we are only 33 million people in the Baltics and Nordics, which is only a minor fraction of what's there globally. And when you talk to the investors coming outside Europe, they don't see Finland, they don't see Estonia, they don't see Sweden and so forth. They are seeing Nordics. And that's basically the brand we should be building on. That's where we should be building on the local strengths and expertise that we've been accumulating and try to pull that together and ensuring that we're working that together.
So, Chris, maybe it's hard to ask from you about sense of urgency about Nordic-Baltic cooperation based in UK, investing all over Europe. But would you consider investment strategy from fund-of-fund point of view to focus more closely for Nordic and Baltic region? Is it big region enough for viable investment strategy, for example, in venture?
Well, let me say what the sense of what is the sense of urgency? My view, the sense of urgency is those who might invest in venture, i.e. potential LPs, who are not sure. I think the sense of urgency is to make that decision because I think Europe and the Baltics and Nordics are going through some golden years in the next 5 years or so. Now, I have no reason to say it's 4 years, 5 years, 6 years, but let's just call it 5 years. There is a dramatic digital transformation revolution happening across all sectors of the industry. There are a significant set of new technologies coming to play to power that. And those innovations will not come from the traditional large existing companies, period. So therefore, it is only going to come from technology startups. So the urgency is, if you have a private equity mandate, is how long are you going to miss this wave from that perspective? On the subject of sustainability, I don't believe there's anything that LPs or VCs need to do, because young people who are building these companies that we all want to invest in fundamentally are building sustainability companies, period. So the asset class that is available to invest in is mostly sustainable or complies with ESG ideas. And that's a very encouraging, wonderful thing to say, but it isn't a special sector. It isn't a special thing. It is just what young people are building in Europe today. I think there is a sense of urgency in our business, and the sense of urgency is to get the capital where it belongs, and that is those companies that are going to truly be Europe's technology leaders in the future. We are absolutely convinced that the notion that only the technology companies that we all hear of will not come in the future just from the West Coast. There are some very good reasons why that is the case historically, but those reasons exist in Europe today. So there is an urgency in that sense, in the sense that we need to get more capital into the system. And we mentioned earlier today about growth. You know, it's a tragic shame that a company gets sold for 100 million when actually there was the management capability, there was the market demand, there was the uniqueness of product such that actually that company could be $1 billion company. And that's not just about returns for investors, that's about return to the economic value of the countries that those people work in.
Great. So we need to start wrapping up. And And we have heard many thoughts that there is potentially possible to do more together. Like Emma mentioned about LP activity, there is more to learn from cross-border activity, more to communicate in sustainability, in diversity. I'd like to conclude these thoughts from you. How can we take it forward from here? And what could be the potential practical steps capturing the ideas, what have been shared over this event? Is it task force, working groups, and so on? Or shall we just organize next event next year and see where we have landed? So, Matthias, do you want to start? And please, everyone with bold practical ideas, where we take it from here.
I have very concrete steps that could be taken. Because one of the issues, as we've been discussing today, is that we need to make the ecosystem more stable. So we need to be able to grow the fund sizes, lock up the capital to the funds, so the LP capital there, so that we have a more stable ecosystem over the cycle with sticky capital in the funds, rather than those funds going directly to the companies, which is always depending on the next funding round. So what we need to start with is really making, as the industry has already succeeded in buyout, is making VC also a investable financial product, because all the GPs are competing on the fundraising, with most of the investors not being 100% dedicated to the VC. So basically, they're competing with all the other products which are available for the investors across the world, across the capital markets. So what we are seeing and what we are hearing is that there is a lot of jargon that industry is putting in place and making really messy. People don't understand the value creation model, and also putting on top of that, we have the closed-ended, well-functioning fund model, but which is very difficult to explain to those who are entering the scene. So I think what I'm putting into the table is a challenge for the GPs, that the GPs should, step up on ensuring that they are able to articulate the opportunity for the investors in the investors' language, not on the language of the startups and the VCs. That's how we make it more investable while still maintaining the entrepreneurial mindset that is embedded in the industry.
Great. Kristina, from VCA point of view, do you have practical ideas how VCAs could work more together and potentially bring the need and sense of urgency of doing more together forward?
It's thanks, Markus. It's a bit of a tough one, right? Because we've been discussing the joint cooperation for a number of years now. But in reality, I think it's exactly in the last sort of year or two when the cooperation is becoming much closer. And this event like this, absolutely, hats off to Estonian Association and Margus, to you and Kadri, and for organizing this event. Absolutely fantastic idea, which kind of came out of almost nowhere, a couple of months ago. And this is a great dialogue. And I'm sure going forward, we will have many more dialogues like this.
Thank you. Emma, any additional thoughts on developing the ecosystem together, practical steps?
Yes, I think events like this are a very good start, and I already feel that we are more and more sharing ideas across the borders, and would like to see more events like this and other similar platforms where to share the ideas. And I think the VC associations of the Baltic and Nordics are playing also the important role in the developing the LP activity, or the enabling the LP activity platform.
Great. Chris, do you have final recommendation to us?
Well, we'll continue doing what we're doing, backing funds in the Nordics and the Baltics. We have 4 at the moment in terms of fund positions. I guess we'll be double that in the coming years. And we continue to do our work, and we invite anybody to come and join us on that journey.
Great. We actually have quite many questions, and I think unfortunately we are not able to address them here on this panel as our event is ending. Maybe just one or two. There is a question about, and maybe Matthias and others, you might have good insight to it, about returns. Do you know if and what type of difference there is in returns if you have single country strategy versus multi-country strategy? Does anybody have that data to compare and prove which one makes more sense?
Well, if we come at from this perspective, of course, we are more of a kind of one country specific and well exposed to it. So I think, of course, then you're averaging out on a lot of the on the market level returns. You're able to get good returns, but of course, there's a lot of volatility inside that. The more, I think, as Chris earlier mentioned, the more you're able to broaden the focus, especially in VC, in terms of geographical reach, I think the probability of getting higher returns and able to choose the best VCs for a portfolio is higher, and therefore there's I think the likelihood of reaching higher returns in the pan-European strategies is higher than having a single country strategy. And also, if you look at the underlying GPs, of course, there's a bit of variance which needs to be taken into account. Also, the development stage, whether you're seed, or whether you're A or B round focused. So the later you go in a strategy, the more you need to be broadening your deal flow in order to get quality deal flow to tap on.
Great. Chris?
The evidence is overwhelming that a multi-country strategy is beneficial, and it isn't just returns, it's actually when you get your money back. Some companies mature much quicker. Some countries have an acquirer that they can move much quicker. So there is this dynamic of the more that you can diversify, the more you have a spread of your returns, both in terms of cash, but also in terms of multiple.
And maybe final one, I find it a bit funny question, but we can elaborate on that. Among all the panelists on the event, is there any fund that EIF has not invested in? I think if you think about the question, it talks about the role of public funding in developing ecosystem. And again, how do you see the public role in developing the ecosystem? And for example, Matthias, would you stay forever investing? Is a mission to invest public funding to private markets forever, or at one point of time, public institutions should develop the market to the level that they start stepping back? So any comments from you?
Should I start?
Yeah, please.
That is one hot topic we are discussing, and that's something that, especially when we see parts of the market maturing, we need to be stepping down. But of course, we need to be very, very cautious about it, because we cannot do it, just saying that we've been investing 20 million in your previous fund, and now we're getting out and saying that 12 months to the first closing. So it is a long-term game. It's very, very difficult when you've entered those positions to get down. But that's definitely in our agenda. We probably will go down on those areas that we'll see maturing, and if we see reason there to be areas to invest, we'll go in there. But it is a fine balance on that one. But I think it is a fair question asking whether EIF is everywhere. I think the correct question would be whether the national players and EIF are everywhere. Basically, they are in the ecosystem, especially if we talk about first-time emerging teams. So we would need more LPs to impose, like Isomer investing in the first-time emerging teams alongside with the NPLs.
Great. Chris?
Government funds. The government funds have a vital role to play in terms of just boosting European venture. European venture is in very good health today, compared with 2 years ago and compared with 5 years ago, bears no resemblance, in my opinion. And that is because governments, and not just the EIF, but the country funds as well across the whole of Europe, have done two vital things. One, they've provided the capital, but also they've provided the leadership in enabling new VCs to start their business. They are very experienced investors. They know, they've sat on so many LPAC advisory boards. They've sat on so many investment committees. They've seen pretty much everything that happens. And that's pretty valuable if you're a new manager starting your new fund in the Nordics or in the Baltics.
Great. Thank you all for joining. It has been really good discussion. And with this panel, we start also wrapping up our today's event.
Thanks so much for such an interesting discussion. We've heard some innovative thoughts today on how to develop the regional ecosystem further. I think it's time to wrap the ideas up.
Thank you. Yes. My feeling is that from the panelists, we heard very clear messages. One is definitely we are moving forward very well, good pace. The ecosystems are developing really well. And this gives us opportunity just to learn more from each other. I was very inspired by Mona-Lotta to hear how much they are working on sustainability and diversity. And this is an area where we shouldn't really compete. It is an area where there is so much more to do together and to learn from each other. Being a fairly small region, we can accelerate and take the ecosystem to a different place. There are many low-hanging fruits in that sense. There's been a lot of discussion about the fund of fund topic, and this is something interesting to explore further and to see if it's practical, what is the way, and what could be the means to make it happen if the ecosystem approves so. We have with Kadri here. We haven't not seen you, the audience. We have seen panelists, but otherwise we have just looked in the camera. But while we started organizing this event, and as also today, there has been so much good vibe about potentially doing something together. The feedback has been awesome. And we feel you have thought along, and we feel you have expectations that we could do more together. So thank you all for participating. We want to hear more from you, your ideas. Please share more, reach out. And I feel like we might really have momentum now.
Thank you.